I am very excited to present our next speaker. Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky is one of the leading figures in the science of happiness. She is professor of psychology at University of California, Riverside, author of The How of Happiness and also The Myths of Happiness. She's been recognized and awarded numerous honors as an educator and a researcher, and her research is pivotal. It is pivotal to what we're doing here, and every dimension of the global happiness movement references and learns from the work that she does. So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky. Thank you.
So I am happy. I'm so happy, delighted to be here at this fantastic event, the World Happiness Summit. I'm a little jet-lagged. I flew in from Sydney yesterday. It was fantastic. I actually was there for a conference on the good life, so that was really relevant. So I have been doing research on happiness. I just calculated it today for 28 years. So I guess that's why they invited me here. So the World Happiness Summit. I usually ask people actually at these kinds of conferences, how many people are interested in happiness or want to be happy, but you're at the friggin' World Happiness Summit, so I guess you're all interested in happiness. So I can't promise I'm gonna make you happier today, but I will arm you with a lot of information. I am not a motivational speaker. I am a full-time scientist. I do experiments, and you'll hear about some of those today. So during the Second World War, aviation experts deployed a lot of energy and resources to studying military planes that went down. And one day somebody asked, why don't we study the planes that stay up in the air? And I think that's a really apt metaphor for the work that I do. And yeah, to hear my slides, here's me. For the work that I do and my colleagues do in the science of well-being, we study why happy people are happy, why healthy people are healthy, and why successful people are successful. So my name is Sonja Lyubomirsky. I always provide a mnemonic because it's a little hard to pronounce. And it means love and peace in Russian. So I think it's a really appropriate name for someone who studies well-being. And here are my collaborators. And I'll be talking a lot about material that appears in my book, The How of Happiness, but there's a lot more new research, of course, that has been done. So I believe that most of us want to be happy. We might use different language to describe that wish. We might pursue happiness differently. But all around the world, when researchers survey people, most people rank happiness as one of the top goals in life. And so I'll show you just sort of an example. Here's an example from a few countries that are kind of different from different continents. The US, Greece, Germany, South Africa, China, Argentina. And so when people are asked to rate how important is happiness as a goal to you on a scale of 1 to 7, you see Americans rated as about a 6.6, really, really important. So what about other countries where you might think that happiness is not necessarily as desirable, as normative? And actually, when you look at other countries, it's people sort of everywhere rated as really, really important. I mean, of course, in the United States, some people argue we're really preoccupied, maybe even obsessed with happiness. We have conferences like this. Happiness, the pursuit of happiness is even embedded in our Declaration of Independence, but really everywhere people care about happiness. I was born in Russia. I came to the United States when I was 10 years old. And in Russia, people talk about the importance of suffering. How it's important to suffer to really, to build character and also to gain salvation into the next life. But even in Russia, if you ask parents, what do you want most for your children? Most people will say, I want my children to be happy, right? So maybe it kind of depends on how you ask the question. So people think that happiness is important, but is it a good thing? I don't think I probably need to convince all of you that it's a good thing. But as a researcher, we actually systematically try to address this question. And so 2 colleagues and I, a while ago, wrote a paper where we looked at 225 studies on happiness to see sort of what are the benefits of being a happy person, what are the benefits, if any, of experiencing positive emotions. And we have found, for example, again, this is called a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is like a study of many studies. And so we found, for example, and this, you of course have already heard about this today and yesterday probably as well, that happy people are more productive at work, they're more creative. Happy people make more money, they have better jobs. So of course the causal direction goes both ways. Money does make you happier despite what you might have heard. At least it just doesn't make you as happy as you think it will, but it does increase happiness. But people who are happier are able to sort of generate more money. They have higher incomes. Same thing with relationships. Happier people are better leaders and negotiators. They are more likely to get married and have fulfilling marriages. So again, marriage makes people happy, but if you're a happy person today, you're more likely to find a marital partner in 10 or 20 years. In fact, one of my favorite studies showed that women who showed genuine happiness, Duchenne smiles, which are those sincere smiles, women who showed genuine happiness in their yearbook photos in college when they were age 21 were more likely to be married at age 27 and had more fulfilling marriages at age 52, right? So your happiness, or whether you show happiness in a photo taken at age 21 is related to how good a marriage you're going to have 30 years later, which is really amazing. And happy people are less likely to divorce. They have more friends, more social support, and happier people are healthier. I'm sure you all know that happier people live longer, and they're more helpful and philanthropic. And this is actually very interesting because some people think that happy people are selfish. They're very self-focused, right? Kind of the idea that, oh, I really care about my own happiness, so it's all going to be about me. But actually, it's people who are sad or depressed that are self-focused. And that makes sense, right? When you are sad, it makes sense to focus on, like, what is the problem? You need to focus on yourself to figure out how to address your sadness. When you're happy, in a sense, you have the luxury to focus outside of yourself. So happier people actually are more generous. They give more tips, bigger tips at restaurants. They're more likely to help others. And happier people also are more resilient to stress and adversity and trauma. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit more information about some of this research, because I think it's so important, starting with health, right? So obviously physical health is really important to the individual, but also to their family and to their neighborhood and community and society at large. And so happier people have been found to be healthier. There are a lot of longitudinal studies in this area. So the idea is, if you are all in one of these studies, I might give you all a questionnaire right now to measure how happy you are, how often you experience positive emotions like tranquility, joy, curiosity, love, pride. And then, say in 5 years or in 10 years or in 40 years, I kind of find you again and I find out how happy you are and how healthy you are, right? Or first of all, are you still alive, right? Do you have chronic disease? How often do you get colds? Do you have pain? Have you ever had a heart attack? Do you have diabetes, et cetera? So this is what researchers have done. And so in this slide, I'm showing you data from many, many different studies. On every line, there's one or more studies. So people who are happy at one point in time have a lower incidence of stroke 16 years later and have a lower incidence of both ischemic and cardiovascular heart disease 10 and 15 years later. And if you have heart disease, you're more likely to survive it if you're a happy person. If you have lung cancer, which is, of course, is a much more deadly disease, you're more likely to survive it 3 years later. And I should note a caveat that no one is sort of blaming the victim here, right? So it's not like, oh, if you're sick, then it's your fault because you're too unhappy, right? But the idea that happiness is one of many factors that influence your health, over time. Happier people are less likely to be on disability years later. And this is actually one of my favorite findings, or one of the most intriguing findings, that happier people are less likely to die in a car accident 8 years later. So it could be that they're less likely to experience road rage, or they're more attentive. Maybe they're more likely to wear a seatbelt. They're less likely to die in car accidents. And it's kind of the big overall findings is happy people live longer. They're less likely to die of all causes. So there are a lot of mechanisms to explain this, like why is it that happier people are healthier? So it could be that they practice healthier habits, right? That they are more likely to go to the doctor, wear seatbelts, smoke less, eat more healthfully. There could also be a more direct effect that happier people who experience more positive emotions have stronger immune function. And so one of my favorite studies is what I call the cold virus study. And so this is a lovely photo here of the rhinovirus, which is the cold virus. And in this study, the researcher Sheldon Cohen found happy people, measured people's happiness, and then actually administered the cold virus directly into the nasal passages of everyone in this study, okay? And I kind of, I like this because everyone was exposed to the common cold. It's kind of, I think of this as kind of like when you're flying on an airplane, right? The cold viruses are everywhere, and so you're all exposed on an airplane to these cold viruses, to the rhinovirus, and then some people, you know, always get sick when they travel, right? And some people seem to never get sick. So why is that? So in a sense, this study was testing that. So everyone in this study was exposed to the rhinovirus. They all had it in their bodies. It was all injected into them. And by the way, the participants were paid very well for their participation, because you'd think, why would you want to be in this study, right? They were paid, I looked it up, they were paid $800 to be in the study. So, and this was done a while ago. Okay, so everyone had the rhinovirus in their nose. And so then what the researchers did is they quarantined the participants for 5 days in a motel, kind of like a jury, you know, sequestered in a motel, so they could monitor them to see, you know, who developed symptoms of a cold and how long. And then they monitored them for a month. And the results were that the happier volunteers were less likely to develop cold symptoms. And then when they did develop a cold, it didn't last as long. And this finding held up even after the researchers controlled for a lot of other factors. So for example, it wasn't the case that the happier people happened to be younger or had higher education or had lower body mass index or anything like that. So all of these factors were partialed out, were controlled, and still you found this effect of happiness on the common cold. And other studies have confirmed this. So for example, one study showed that people who are getting the hepatitis B vaccination, the Hep B vaccine, happier people getting the vaccination developed stronger immunoprotective responses to the vaccination. So it's kind of like their immune system is stronger, it's bolstered. So obviously having a stronger immune system is a great thing, and happiness is associated with that. Okay, so happier people are healthier. But what about the workplace, right? Is happiness important? Of course, we know happiness is really important at work as well, in your career. And so lots of studies on this. So for example, how happy you are today is going to predict how much, if you're a salesperson, how much you sell years later, how productive your manager, your supervisor judges you, how loyal and satisfied your customers are. Interestingly, it turns out that being too happy, being super happy at work is not related to productivity. It's actually going to make you a little bit less productive. So if you are like a 10 out of 10 on happiness, you're not going to be as productive at work as someone who's like an 8 out of 10, probably because, you know, you're so happy when you're a 10 that it's hard for you to focus on your job, and maybe you also annoy your colleagues by your incredible happiness. But in relationships, being a 10 is actually good, right? No one wants to be with an unhappy partner, so even being too happy is not harmful in relationships, but it is a little bit harmful on the job. So one way that researchers study the work, sort of variables related to work, is by doing experiments. And I'm an experimental social psychologist, so I love experiments because it's really the only kind of study where you can at least try to infer causality, sort of what causes what. And so what researchers try to do is they try to make participants happy temporarily and then sort of see what is the effect of that. And now there's lots of different ways of making people happy temporarily, right? You could give someone a piece of chocolate. You can give them feedback, like tell them that they're really good at something, even if they're not, right? That's called false feedback. And so you can show videos, right? Like a happy humorous clips from movies and make you happy temporarily. So there was a famous study that was done looking at creativity to see if you put someone in a good, happy mood, would they be more creative? So in this study, this study was actually done all with doctors. These were internists, and they were made happy temporarily by getting a gift, right? So the researchers gave them a little gift, and the gift was candy and chocolate. And it was wrapped in cellophane so you could see it, but you couldn't eat it right away. You had to sort of eat it later. And the reason for that is that the researchers didn't want the effects, like the physiological effects of the eating itself, to influence the happiness. So, and they also had to exclude some participants from that study. Anyone can guess what kind of participants they needed to exclude? Well, one is diabetics, right? Diabetics, right? You can't be in the study if you're diabetic. But another one is dieters, right? So if you're on a diet, getting a gift of chocolate and candy is not going to make you happy, right? It may make you unhappy, right? Because you know you can't have it. So they couldn't have dieters in the study. So they had a neutral condition where people did not get a gift. And so people who were made happy temporarily by getting a gift, and then the researchers measured their creativity. So there are different ways to measure creativity in the laboratory. In this study, the researchers gave the participants a creativity test. It's called the Remote Associates Test. And what it is a whole series of items where you get 3 words. And here I have an example: crab, sauce, and pine. And you have to come up with a 4th word that connects with with each of these 3 words. So a 4th word that if you put together with these 3 words sort of creates a new word. Does that make sense? So you have to find what this 4th secret word is. Anyone know what it is? Apple, that's right. Okay, great. You guys are really creative. So you see that? Crab apple, applesauce, pineapple, right? I mean, when you see it, it seems obvious, right? But it's not easy to do. And actually, I once gave a talk to a large group of surgeons at Washington University in St. Louis, and none of them got it. And they were all really tired from a day of surgery. So I think they were just too fatigued. So you have a whole series of items like this, and the idea is that the more creative and flexible you're thinking, kind of the faster you can do this test and the more of these items you can get. And so the researchers found that those, and again, this study was also done with doctors, right? Those participants who were given a gift of chocolate, so they were just put in a happy mood temporarily, did better on this creativity test. I think it's kind of amazing because it shows, and my friend Barb Fredrickson at UNC Chapel Hill, who was also at the Sydney conference, and we actually shared a hotel room. It was really fun. So she, you may know, developed a theory called the Broaden and Build theory of positive emotions. And this theory suggests, and there's lots of evidence, that even temporary, transient boosts of positive mood, positive emotion, a little boost of joy, a little boost of tranquility, a little boost of affection or connection can lead to durable, important consequences, right? So you think like, oh, who cares? I'm just happy for 5 minutes. What good is that going to do? But it will do a lot of good because in those 5 minutes, you might smile and someone might approach you and you might make a new connection, or you might have a good idea at work, and that idea will lead to something else, lead to the invitation for a presentation. And so it could create what are called upward spirals, right? So one good thing feeds on another good thing. And so happy people are more creative than those who are less happy. Okay, so I've been talking about how, most people around the world seek happiness, say that they want to be happy, and that happiness is a good thing, right? When you're a happy person, good things come to you. You're more likely to accrue lots of good stuff. And so the big question really is it possible to become happier? Now, I don't think that's such an obvious or sort of stupid question. For a long time, scientists have been pessimistic about whether it's even possible for people to become happier. Obviously, I think probably all of you sitting in the audience today think, well, of course, everyone can be happier if they want to, but that is not necessarily kind of an obvious answer or question. So as I said, for a long time, scientists have been kind of pessimistic about this idea of whether happiness can be improved. And there are really three sources of this pessimism. And one of them is there's research from the field of behavior genetics that we're all born with a happiness set point, that a large portion of happiness is genetically influenced. Those of you who have children know, right, that like if you're biological children, they're all genetically related to you. You feel like you raised them in a similar environment, and yet some of your kids are happier than others. Am I right? Right? And so I have four children, and they're from ages 3 to almost 18. And this is my 5-year-old, and she is one of my really happy kids, but not all of my kids are equally happy. And so we know that identical twins who share 100% of their DNA are much more similar in their happiness levels than our fraternal twins who share only 50% of their DNA. And so that suggests that a large portion of happiness is genetically influenced. Another reason to be pessimistic about improving happiness is that happiness is part of our personality. It's a lifelong trait. Personality is something that's very stable, right? So there used to be actually kind of a saying that you can't change personality after age 30. It actually turns out to be false, and there's even a famous article in my field that's called "You Can Change Personality After Age 30," but it's very, very stable. But it's very stable, right? So if you look at going back to your high school or college yearbook, the most extroverted, the most happy, or the most neurotic individuals in your class from 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, if you met them today, are probably still going to be the most extroverted, or the most happy, or the most neurotic, right? That's called rank order stability. Your average level of personality does change over time, but your rank tends to stay the same, pretty similar. So if happiness is part of our personality, then how can we change it? And also there's a phenomena that I'm very interested to studying in my lab, which is called hedonic adaptation. And I talk a lot about it in another book that I wrote called The Myths of Happiness. And this is the idea that human beings are remarkably good at getting used to changes in their lives, right? That especially positive changes. So when we make more money, we get a raise, right? At first, it's great. It gives us a boost. But after a while, we get used to it. We move into a better apartment or a better house, and we love it at first, but then we kind of get used to it. And even something like marriage, right? So when people get married, of course, they get a boost in happiness. How long do you think that boost typically lasts? 12 years. Someone said 12 years, which is very optimistic of them. Someone said 8 months, okay. So the answer actually is 2 years. So on average, after marriage, after the wedding, people get a big boost, and then on average, people go back to their baseline in 2 years. Now, it's an average, right? Some people actually get less happy after they get married, but there is a group that gets happier and stays happier sort of for as long as researchers have followed them. And so, of course, that's the really interesting question. What is it that they're doing that is keeping them happy? So if we adapt or get used to almost all positive changes in our lives, then how can we ever get sustainably happier, right? So that's another source of pessimism. So I wouldn't be here today if I didn't sort of think that we shouldn't be so pessimistic, right? And so my argument, kind of in a nutshell, is despite the finding that our happiness is partially genetically influenced, and despite the finding that, our life circumstances don't matter to our happiness as much as we think they would, I still believe that a large portion of happiness, and I argue that it's up to 40%, but don't take that number seriously. It's just an estimate. a large part of our happiness is in our power to change. And so this is this is a pie chart that I often show to sort of show what determines happiness. People often misinterpret it. Because it's not about an individual happiness, right? It's about a population. And so basically what it says is that and I have a little warning there, these numbers are approximate, that about half or 50% of individual differences in happiness are due to genetics. So the idea is people in this room, some of you are happier than others, right? If I gave you a questionnaire right now, some of you would be a lot happier than others. Why is it that there are individual differences in happiness, where about 50% of the answer is in genetics, about 10% of the answer is in life circumstances, and I should mention that that really only applies to people who are relatively comfortable. So if you're in an abusive relationship, or if you live in poverty, then obviously that number is going to be a lot higher than 10%. And that leaves a large portion of happiness under our control. And so what a lot of researchers are studying now is sort of how do we harness that sort of large portion, whether it's 40% or something like that, to get people to improve their levels of happiness. And so there are many, many strategies that people can use to be happier. And unless you've been living under a rock, right, you're not going to be surprised that expressing gratitude or learning to forgive or practicing your religion if you have one, or exercising or meditating, all of those things could make you happier. And so in my lab, what I've been doing is I've been doing what are called positive interventions or happiness interventions, which are basically experiments that we do to test whether expressing gratitude or savoring the moment or doing acts of kindness, whether those things make people happier, make people sustainably happier. And positive interventions are kind of like clinical trials, but instead of, say, testing a new drug, we're testing gratitude, right? Instead of testing what's the appropriate or optimal dosage of a drug, and should this drug be taken with other or not be taken with other drugs, we're kind of testing what's the optimal dosage of gratitude, and should gratitude not be sort of practiced by certain kinds of individuals. So those are the kinds of questions that we are doing in our lab. And so typically over the course of a few weeks or months, we ask our participants to practice different strategies. We randomly assign them, right? These are all randomly controlled experiments. We randomly assign them to do certain strategies. And then we also have certain kinds of comparison or control groups. And then we follow people across time to see, do they get happier over time? And so we've done lots of different kinds of experiments. One of my favorite recent ones actually was featured on the Today Show, and that's the Live Your Life Like It's Your Last Month. We went to James Madison University in Virginia, and we asked the students there, anyone here from there? We asked the students there to pretend that in a month they're moving away, somewhere far away, and they don't know when they'll be back, and to live their lives like it's their last month. And I really love that intervention, and people got happier, and they savored more, they took more, I guess apparently there's a lot of good hiking around campus, and they did a lot of hikes, and they went to their favorite restaurants, spent a lot more time with their friends and family. We also inadvertently increased the number of one-night stands that these students were experiencing. So, but we didn't tell our human subjects approval board about that. But anyway, so we do lots of interventions, and I'm going to just show you a few very, very quick examples of what we've done. So the focus of my lab is actually not really how to become happier, but sort of how and why did strategies like savoring your last month or expressing gratitude, how and why do these strategies work? What are the factors that underlie their effectiveness? And so the very first intervention we ever did was in 1999, so that was 18 years ago. We asked people to count their blessings. You all know what that means, to write down what they're grateful for every week. And we either asked people to do this once a week, so let's say every Sunday night, count your blessings, or people did it 3 times a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night. And in this experiment, we found what I call the importance of dosage. And this was a 6-week study. So for 6 weeks, people did this experiment. And so what we found was, and these are histograms that show changes in gratitude and changes in happiness from before the intervention, remember this was a 6-week intervention, to immediately after. And so we found that people who practice gratitude once a week, this doesn't seem to be working, the laser pointer, but you see that red bar in the middle, people who practice gratitude once a week, they became more grateful over time, and they also became happier relative to the other groups. But people who practiced gratitude 3 times a week, nothing happened. And so we think this is evidence for the importance of the right dosage of gratitude, right? That somehow counting your blessings too often might have backfired, or just not necessarily backfired, but just didn't work. And we actually have found this in other studies, right? That if you do something too often, you might get tired of it. It might become more like a chore, or you might maybe you can't think of things to be grateful for, and then you conclude, wow, I must not have enough to be grateful for. And so it's really important to pay attention to dosage. So here's a kind of a list of factors that are important for implementing kind of your pursuit of happiness in the most optimal way. And the first factor that we saw was dosage. Now I want to also mention the importance of fit. So some people come to me and they say, I hate counting my blessings. Is anyone in this room who thinks that counting blessings is kind of hokey? Really, pretty much no one, because you wouldn't be here today if you thought that. But you know what? I think it's hokey, right? I can't do it. I find it's kind of trite and hokey. I can't count my blessings. So it's just not a good fit for me. But I do think that I love to write emails once in a while to people in my life that I'm really grateful for. So there's other ways of expressing gratitude. There's other ways of pursuing happiness. So it's really important to find the right fit with your personality, with your goals, your values, your culture. And so it turns out that if you are doing a happiness strategy or activity that really fits your personality or your values, you're going to put more effort into it, and you're going to be more motivated to engage in it. You're going to get happier. You're going to benefit more from it. We also did a study where we looked at the importance of motivation, right? So some people are really motivated to become happier, like everyone in this room, and some people are not. So we found in a study where we asked people for 8 weeks to practice gratitude or optimism, we found that those who were really motivated to be happy, they got happier. You see the yellow bars were the motivated people. They got happier immediately after, and even 6 months later, they were happier than people who are not as motivated. So again, that might seem obvious, but what we do in experimental research is try to, ask these questions and systematically test even sort of the obvious questions. So there's a importance of that was motivation and fit and fit and motivation. We also looked at things like social support, right? So it turns out that not surprisingly, that when you have social support for any kind of self-improvement goal, if you have a buddy that kind of supports you and says, hey, this is great that you're doing this, you're going to be more successful. So we did a study where we asked people to try to be more optimistic for 4 weeks. We asked people to visualize their best possible self, kind of think about all your dreams coming true for once a week, every 4 weeks. And people who, the control group got less happy, those social support group got happier. So these are sort of the normal participants that we always have. And then the participants for whom we gave extra social support to, they got an extra boost. So they got even happier. I'm a runner, although I haven't run as much since I've had my 4th child. But I usually have a buddy that I run with. And when I wake up at 6 in the morning, and I really, really don't want to wake up, but I know that she's going to be standing on a street corner waiting for me to start our run, and she'll be not very happy if I'm not there. And I'm sure she's thinking the same thing. So having that buddy really motivates, really helps you achieve any kind of self-improvement goal. So there's the importance of, that was the importance of social support. So we also have found in our research that culture really matters, right? There are cultural differences in how people pursue happiness. And so we do a lot of cross-cultural research. So far, we have not really found many differences within Western cultures, like between Germany and France, for example. But we do find differences between Asian cultures or Eastern cultures and Western cultures. And it's not surprising. Obviously, cultures are very different. In some cultures, it's not as socially desirable to pursue happiness, or the way that it's pursued is going to be different. And so we did a study, for example, where we compared students at Seoul National University in Korea to students at UC, University of California, Riverside, where I am a professor. And we had these students write gratitude letters and do acts of kindness. And what we found was very interesting. So this is data for the American students, and this was a 6-week intervention. And so you see increases in happiness from before the study through the 6-week experiment. And you see here that students in the United States who did acts of kindness or who wrote gratitude letters, they got happier over time. So this is not surprising, right? We know we have found this. Yeah. So I'm sorry? So this is not surprising. We have found this in other studies as well. But look what happened with the South Korean students. So the South Korean students who did acts of kindness, they got happier, but the Korean students who wrote gratitude letters actually got less happy. And we were really surprised by that finding, but then when I talked to a lot of, I actually gave a talk about this in South Korea, in Seoul, and the audience there said to me, well, you know, in Korea, expressing gratitude is really a mixed blessing, right? That it's people who express gratitude in Korea, they feel uplifted and they do feel happy, they feel more connected, but they also feel indebted and guilty sometimes when they express gratitude. So that is a more kind of a mixed experience. And we actually have found this in the United States as well, right? Gratitude does not always feel pleasant. Sometimes you kind of feel like embarrassed to having needed to express gratitude, that help in the first place. You feel indebted. You want to kind of pay back. And so we find interesting cultural differences. And we also find that how much work people are putting in to their pursuit of happiness matters, right? So if you are really working hard, you're taking it seriously, helping others or expressing gratitude, you're going to get a lot happier. See, the red line over here are people in the United States who put a lot of effort into expressing gratitude or doing acts of kindness. They got a lot happier. People who put a medium amount of effort, they got a little happier. And people who put little effort in didn't get happier at all. So right, not very surprising. The same kind of pattern in South Korea, just a little bit weaker. And so one of the key conclusions of our research from my lab and other labs is that happiness takes work, right? It takes energy, it takes effort, it takes motivation. Just like with any goal in life, right? If you want to raise good, happy, healthy children, if you want to succeed in your career, obviously you need to put a lot of effort into those goals, and the same thing for happiness. And so in terms of what we're doing next in our research, we're continuing to study positive activities and what works and what doesn't work. One of the questions that we have found, for example, about age, it turns out that age doesn't really matter in our research. We have done these studies with kids, with teenagers. We thought, oh my God, that teenagers are so typically ungrateful, right? That they would not want to write gratitude letters. And we've done research with them, we've done focus groups, and actually the opposite is true. It's like they realize that they're not grateful enough, and so they're really happy to do that. We've done research with kids. We did a study with middle school kids in Vancouver, and kids who did acts of kindness in Canada, not only did they get happier, but they became more popular with their peers. Their classmates liked them more, which is really, really great. It's really important. So acts of kindness not only make you happier, but people like you more. We also have been interested in whether these kinds of happiness strategies that I have been studying, whether those kinds of strategies might also help people who are depressed or anxious or have other kinds of mental health conditions, whether they help people like that to alleviate their symptoms. And there's really kind of two ways of looking at that question. You might imagine that maybe if you're a depressed person, that you might, yeah. Okay, yeah. So they're telling me to wrap it up. It's like at the Oscars, you know, where they start playing the music. And so basically the question is, would depressed individuals benefit more from our interventions because presumably they're more motivated, or might they benefit less because, you know, if you can't get off the couch because you're so depressed, right, how are you going to go out and do acts of kindness? Well, the answer really is both yes to both questions. We actually did a study with depressed college students and found that college students who were depressed, who wrote gratitude letters, actually got a little bit less happy. And they told us that writing gratitude letters made them feel like a failure. They couldn't think of things to write about, or they felt too guilty about the people that helped them. And so we really have to be sensitive when you were talking to a clinical population about how to sort of adapt the strategies to those populations. All right, so I'm going to skip this last study because I've been told to go. But you guys, you know what? You guys can email me. I have my email right over there. There's a free online course that I have if you want to learn more. But basically, the conclusion is that happiness is really important, right? That we know that happy people are more creative, they're better at their work, they're better at their relationships, they're healthier, and they're more generous. And so it is really important to work to be a happier person. And I always like to end my talks with a quote from Aristotle. 2,000 years ago, he really kind of summarized the gist, sort of the take-home message from the science of happiness, which is that happiness depends upon ourselves. Thank you.
Run.